Operation Nimrod, the Iranian Embassy, siege, 1980. Location, the Iranian Embassy, South Kensington, London. On May 5th, 1980, the world witnessed a spectacular hostage rescue mission in the Iranian Embassy in London. After 5 days of the hostage crisis, the rescue action was conducted by the famous British unit trained for special tasks, the Special Air Service, better known as the SAS. The action, known as Operation Nimrod, was an example of a superb counter-terrorist operation, as it resulted in 5 of the 6 terrorists being eliminated and 1 captured, and only 1 casualty among the 26 hostages during the assault. The Iranian embassy siege began on Wednesday, April 30th, 1980, when 6 members of the so-called Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan, or DRFLA, stormed the Iranian embassy at 16 Prince's Gate, South Kensington, London. The reason behind the attack was because of the oppression of the Arab population in the oil-wealthy province of Khuzestan, or Arabistan, as it was called by the Arabs, by the new Iranian regime led by Ayatollah Khomeini. The attack on the embassy in London was to get the attention of the world, and especially Arab countries, towards their issue. The terrorists arrived in London 1 month earlier, on March 31st. The leader of the group was Owen Ali Mohammed, or Salim Tokay, an Arab political activist from Iran, and the only member of the group that spoke English. During the 1-month preparation, the terrorists equipped themselves with weapons that were smuggled into the United Kingdom, likely via an Iraqi diplomatic shipment. Owen and his associates were armed with 2 Polish-made Scorpion machine pistols, 3 Browning HP-35 pistols loaded with 9mm Winchester hollow-point ammunition, 1 .38 caliber revolver, and several Soviet RGD-5 grenades. Day 1. At 11:25 hours, the group slammed the door and captured the police, Constable Trevor Locke from the Diplomatic Protection Group. Constable Locke had his radio taken, but only after he managed to press the panic button without being noticed, sending an emergency signal to Scotland Yard. Besides, he managed to keep his .38 caliber revolver secret from the terrorists. In just a few minutes, the terrorists took control of the entire building, taking 26 hostages. 17 of them were Iranian members of the embassy staff. 8 of them were visitors and Constable Locke. Among the visitors were 2 BBC employees, Sim Harris and Chris Kramer. The hostages were gathered, and Owen declared their demands: autonomy for Arabistan, the release of 91 Arab prisoners from Iranian prisons, as well as a plane to fly themselves and the hostages out of the UK. The deadline to meet the demands was set to noon, May 1st, under the threat that the whole embassy would be blown up. Alerted by the panic button on Constable Locke's radio, the Metropolitan Police responded immediately. In just a few minutes, Deputy Assistant Commissioner John Dello appeared in front of the embassy and established an improvised command post in his car. As the situation developed, the post was moved to the building of the Royal School of Needlework, and then to the nearby Montessori Nursery School. The first thing the police did after sealing the area was to establish a contact with Owen via the field telephone that was dropped inside the embassy. The field telephone was chosen, as it would continue to record conversations, even when it was not being used. Metropolitan Police Chief Inspector Max Vernon became the negotiator on the other end. Soon after, the place was filled with an entire army of journalists and TV crews. The British authorities quickly became aware of the seriousness of the situation. A crisis management team gathered in the Cabinet Office briefing room, also known as COBRA, chaired by William Whitelaw, the Home Secretary, as the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was unavailable. COBRA agreed that the police were to lead the negotiations, but in case of hostages being harmed, the army would step in. That is, the SAS would commence a military assault. Even though the peaceful solution was the top priority, the British government was determined not to give in to the terrorists, and in no case allow them to flee the country. The British also had to count on the fact that there wasn't the slightest possibility that the Iranian government would give in to the terrorist demand. The Iranian government was also eager to use the situation in their favor and to portray the captured embassy personnel as martyrs. In the afternoon, the hostage takers would release an ill hostage, Freedom Muzaffarian, a press officer. Day 2. On May 1st, 2 SAS teams, red and blue, arrived at the Regent's Park's barracks in white Range Rovers, and then they moved into the building at number 14 through 15 that belonged to the Royal College of General Practitioners that was next door to the embassy. To remain unnoticed, the SAS sneaked into the building through back alleys under the cover of night. The other building, right next to the terrorists, the residence of the Ethiopian embassy, was occupied by my 5 technicians who were assigned to eavesdrop on the terrorists. They did it with the help of microphones put inside holes in walls. They drilled with small hand drills. As a distraction for the noise they made by the drills, passenger aircraft landing at Heathrow were redirected to fly at a low altitude over the embassy. Inside the embassy, Owen was having difficulty with another ill hostage, Chris Kramer. Since his condition was worsening with each passing minute, and police were not willing to send in a doctor, Owen had no choice but to release him. The first thing Chris Kramer did once he was free was to give information to the police about the hostage takers. The most important moment of the day was noon, when the deadline was set for the Arab prisoners to be released. However, as nothing happened, Owen postponed the deadline to 14 hours. The British authorities were certain that Owen was not ready to fulfill his threats and intentionally let the second deadline pass as well. After the second deadline passed, it became evident that they were right. Owen also realized that his demands were never going to be met and decided to change them. His new demands were that 3 ambassadors from 3 Arab countries, Iraq, Jordan, and Algeria, should come and serve as mediators for the terrorists' safe passage from the UK. Day 3, the third day of the hostage crisis, brought about nothing but new demands, set by Owen. Otherwise, he would kill Abdul Faziazati, the cultural attaché. Since the police refused to reinstall previously cut-off telephone and telex lines, Owen asked for a man from the BBC who knew Harris, one of his hostages, to dictate him his demands. At 1500 hours, Tony Crabb, editor of BBC TV News, arrived to note down Owen's demand. These were the arrival of 1 Arab ambassador as negotiator, a coach for the terrorists, hostages, and ambassador to be taken to Heathrow Airport, for non-Iranian hostages to be released at the airport, and finally, an aircraft to take the terrorists, ambassador, and the rest of the hostages to one of the Arab countries, presumably Iraq, where the remaining hostages would be released. Owen requested that these demands should be broadcast by the BBC on the evening news. Later that evening, BBC Radio only briefly broadcasted the terrorists' demands and even misinterpreted them. Owen was furious. Day 4, at 605 hours, on May 3rd, Owen yelled at Vernon via the field telephone line about being cheated. He demanded Tony Crabb from the BBC to return in order to take new notes on his demands, or a hostage would be killed. This time, the police had no choice but to give in to Owen's demand. At 1530 hours, Crabb appeared, and after being reprimanded by his hostage friend Harris, he took notes exactly as Owen told him. police negotiator and assured Owen his demands would be broadcasted in his exact words. In return, he asked Owen to release 2 hostages, which he agreed. As arranged, the first hostage, a pregnant woman named Hayat Kanji, was released before the demands were broadcasted by the BBC radio, and the second, Ali Gilgan Safar, a Pakistani tourist, was released after the news. Demands were broadcasted by Scotland Yard's head of information, word for word. Even though the police seemed to have things under control, preparations for the military assault were still in progress. At 2,300 hours, an SAS team moved quietly across the rooftops to reach the roof of the Iranian embassy. Once there, they spotted a skylight that could serve as a potential entry point. On the back end of the roof, SAS soldiers secured the abseil ropes for entry through the windows. Day 5, broadcasting their demands was a small victory for the terrorists and definitely improved their mood. On day 5 of the siege, they received the news that the Arab ambassadors agreed to meet the British in order to solve the crisis. As a sign of goodwill, they let another hostage go, the journalist Mustafa Karkuti. Cobra, on the other hand, didn't have any hopes that the crisis would end in a peaceful manner. The SAS made detailed plans to storm the embassy and were ready to drop in at any moment. Day 6 British opinion was right on the spot. On May 5th, the 6th day of the siege, things suddenly got worse as Owen began to be more and more suspicious about noises that had come from the Ethiopian embassy and the bricks that had moved in the wall. Owen started to think that the police were preparing to attack them. His suspicions grew bigger as no Arab mediator appeared to begin negotiation. At 1300 hours, the BBC radio broadcast the news that there was still no agreement on which Arab ambassador would lead the negotiations, and Owen realized he was being bluffed. He picked up the phone and told police negotiator Vernon that they had 45 minutes to bring the ambassador, or a hostage would die. At 1345 hours, 3 shots were heard from inside the embassy. As Cobra was informed of the situation, they gave the order for the SAS teams to prepare the assault. At 17 hours, the commander of the 22 SS, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rose, informed that 2 SAS teams were ready to assault the embassy. At 1820 hours, police attempted to make another contact with the terrorists through the imam from the local mosque. During the conversation, another 3 shots were heard, after which the front door was opened and a body was dumped onto the step. It was the body of Abbas Lavasani, the chief press officer and a zealous supporter of the Islamic Revolution. Lavasani was killed at 1345, while the latest shots were only a bluff. Owen informed the police that the next hostage would die in 45 minutes. Lavasani's death meant the police's job had ended and that SSS would take over the operation. Afterwards, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher approved the assault, and Inspector Dello officially handed over control to Lieutenant Colonel Rose at 1907 hours. Planning the assault, the successful police negotiations that had lasted for 5 days had allowed the SAS teams to devise a detailed plan for assaulting the embassy. At the beginning, they used a scale model of the first and second floor made by police carpenters to plan the attack. Both planning and training were taken to a higher level. Once the pioneer company of the Irish Guards were engaged to build a life-size replica of all floors. This ensured the assault was planned to every minute detail. It anticipated the simultaneous assault, both by blue and red teams, a total of 32 men. Those in blue team were responsible for assaulting the basement, ground floor, and the first floor, whilst those in the red team took the top 3 floors. It was of greatest importance for all teams to attack the assigned floors exactly at the same time. They were to clear the floors in the shortest possible amount of time, so that the terrorists would not have time to respond. Blue and red team had the standard SAS weapons and equipment designed for the counter-terrorist operations. They were dressed in black assault suits, for which the SAS later became famous for. The upper body was protected with custom body armor with high-velocity plates. The head was covered by a gray flash hood, under which a standard Army 6 gas mask was worn. Each man had a radio with a headset and built-in microphone to maintain constant communication. In the assault on the Iranian embassy, the SAS soldiers were armed with Heckler and Koch MP-3 submachine guns with a flashlight mounted on top, Browning 9mm high-powered pistols, and G60 stun grenades. MP-FEX and MP-5s were also used as there were not enough MP-5Es to equip all of the assaulters. Apart from submachine guns, Remington 8 and 70 pump-action shotguns and sledgehammers were carried to blow off the door hinges and locks, and frame charges were carried to breach the windows. Assault in 1923 hours. Assault teams received the code word Hyde Park, which signaled the abseilers to hitch their ropes. It was followed by another code word, London Bridge, the signal to start the attack. The assault would begin with a diversionary explosion of the skylight, and the red and blue team attacks were intended to happen simultaneously. Team 1 of Red Team came through the blown-off skylights to clear the 3rd and 4th floor. They had the easiest task as both floors were clear of terrorist presence. Team 2, also of the Red Team, abseiled from the roof down to the rear of the building to the 2nd floor. As they were coming down, the team leader got stuck on his harness. As the other men tried to help him, one of them accidentally broke a window, therefore alerting the terrorists. Team 2 was supposed to wait for the explosion, but the course of the events forced them to enter the building before they had planned to. To the misfortune of the entangled team leader, the curtains had caught on fire and began to burn him through the broken window. He suffered some burns, but somehow managed to evade serious injury. The second abseiling team released him by dropping him to the 2nd floor balcony. With painful burns, the team leader entered the building. Just as Team 2 went in, they realized that the terrorists had barricaded themselves and hostages in. Explosions in the broken glass alerted the terrorists, who began shooting at the male hostages held in the telex room. Before the SSS came in, the terrorists had shot 3 hostages, of which one had died instantly. Sergeant Tommy Palmer was trying to find another way in when he noticed a terrorist trying to set fire to the room. Palmer's gun jammed, but when the terrorist fired his pistol, he missed. The terrorist then ran into the telex room, but was shot dead as he was pulling a grenade. Another terrorist was shot dead right there in the room, while one managed to disguise himself amongst the hostages. In the nearby cipher room, the SAS released female hostages and took them along with the others to the backyard. They threw the male hostages from soldier to soldier to ensure that the remaining terrorists didn't have time to act aggressively. As they were coming down the stairs filled with Shia's gas, one SAS soldier noticed the concealed terrorist, pushed him down the stairs, after which another SAS soldier shot him dead. 3 to 4 magazines were emptied into him to ensure he was dead. It was a good shot since the terrorist was holding a grenade in his hand, ready to activate it. As teams 1 and 2 were sweeping the top floors, Team 3 from the blue team assaulted the 1st floor via the balcony, which they climbed onto from the adjacent building. Lance Corporal McAleese, holding a frame charge, shouted at the hostage, Sim Harris, to move out of the way. They blew off the window and stormed in after they threw in flashbang grenades. It was more than 2 minutes after the red team entered the building, As they rushed through the first floor rooms, they bumped into Owen wrestling with Police Constable Locke. Once Locke realized the assault was on, he took his concealed revolver and attacked Owen. Then the door flew open and the voice shouted, "Trevor! Get away!" Then Owen was shot dead by one of the SAS soldiers. Another terrorist was spotted by the ambassador's office. He was wounded by one SAS soldier and shot dead when he lifted his pistol. Team 4 and Team 5 entered the building from the rear by slamming the ground floor French doors leading to the library. Their task of clearing the ground floor and cellar went smoothly, as they found neither terrorists nor hostages. As the fire began to rage through the building, all hostages were taken through the library to the backyard. There they were all bound with cable ties, as one terrorist was still among them. He was ultimately recognized by Sim Harris and taken away by the SASA soldiers. The clock showed 1940 hours. In just 17 minutes, the SAS managed to kill 5 terrorists, capture 1, and release 19 out of the 20 hostages. Only 1 hostage was killed during the assault. He and the previously killed Abbas Lavasani were the only hostage fatalities of the crisis. Once the operation was over and the hostages were secured, firefighters began putting out the fire. Then the control over the crisis was passed back from the Army to the Metropolitan Police. The whole operation was broadcasted live and allowed the public to witness the bravery, professionalism, and high level of readiness by the SAS. By that time, the unit was relatively unknown outside military circles. After the Iranian embassy crisis, all eyes were on them, and the number of new applicants wanting to join the SAS surged dramatically. From that period on, the SAS became known as a superb counter-terrorist unit.